What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the FCL podcast. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Stephen Rafis and Matt Dunn. Today, we're really excited to welcome a special guest, Pat Kavanagh. We'll discuss the NCAA tournament, a big weekend coming up for men's and women's. It's crazy how fast the season has flown, and really excited to get into the show today. Matt, I'll let you kick things off.
Thanks, Deemer. A little bit of a different structure today, just with the NCAA tournament coming up and a special guest, Pat Cav, coming on. So we are going to get right into our players' perspective with Pat Kavanagh here in a second. After that, we will break down some thoughts on the selection show and the NCAA first round coming up. With that being said, let's welcome Pat to the show.
How's it going, guys?
What's up, Pat? Excited to have you. Obviously, you've been a household name the last 5 years, with your, playing days at Notre Dame. I pulled up your bio. I'll read it through quick because, again, I just think it's really cool to take in all that you accomplished at Notre Dame. Back-to-back NCAA champion to finish your season, 2024 to Wharton winner, which was the first in Notre Dame history. Finished with the Notre Dame points record of 301 points and record of 184 assists, and ACC Offensive Player of the Year, first team All-American, and tons of accolades throughout the rest of your career. Pat, maybe to kick things off, how does it feel now to just be on the other end of it? 1 year out of school, getting ready for your second pro season, coming off a box. I'm sure you've been watching and going to a lot of your brother's games. Give us some perspective there.
Thank you for the kind intro, and appreciate you guys having me. But yeah, it's definitely been a lot different being on the other side of it. I grew up going to Matt's games with Chris, and then played with Chris, and had always heard from Matt the few years where he was able to watch me and Chris play together, how brutal it was not to be actually on the field and have an impact on the game. And I kind of got a taste of that this year. It's so much harder not being out there competing and having a tangible impact on the game. You got to just sit back and hope that everything goes for the best. So it is kind of excruciating, but I've been enjoying watching them play, and been a bit of an up and down year for them, and kind of few losses, which hasn't really happened in the past few years. But yeah, I think they're still capable of putting it all together and being really dangerous in this NCAA tournament. So I'm really excited for this.
Pat, we were talking a little beforehand. Last year was your first summer playing pro in the PLL. You got traded in the off season. You just played the second half of the box season indoor. How was your pro lacrosse experience like? How does that differ from college, or differ from your expectations? Or what's your take in your first kind of season and a half playing some professional lacrosse?
Yeah, I think I definitely had a bit of an interesting experience my first summer in the PLL. I, to a sense, was kind of burnt out of lacrosse, just from playing back-to-back years, going all the way to Memorial Day. I got shoulder surgery in the fall of my fifth year, so I had to rehab from early September all the way to February. Took about 4 or 5 months, and then went right into I got cleared and went right into, we played Cleveland State the week after I got cleared. I only practiced 3 or 4 times full contact after getting cleared. So I think it just took a bit of a mental toll on me, how much my body went through those past 2 years, and just rehab constantly, lacrosse, and went into the summer, had a wild week after winning the national championship, celebrate for a few days, and then went down to the Tewaaraton, and then was fortunate enough to win that. And then 48 hours later, I was playing in my first PLL game. So didn't really have much of a break, and my body was kind of going through the ringer. And then I ended up pulling my groin, pretty bad groin pull, basically tore it in that second week against you, Matt, against the Whips in Charlotte. And then wasn't fully healthy going into that week 3 against the Water Dogs, but I was playing on the same team as my brother Matt. So I was I'm doing everything I can to get every opportunity with my older brother, who is my idol my whole life. And so I probably should have sat out that game, and maybe I would have been healthy more the majority of the summer, but just played in that game and then destroyed my groin even more, and then was out for the next 7 weeks, I think. So yeah, it was just a little bit of an interesting summer. Not the greatest experience, honestly, but it was an honor, being teammates with some of these legendary figures. It's just a cool experience. You walk to the locker room, you look at guys like my brother Matt, Garrett Epple, Marcus Holman, legends that I've been growing up watching my entire life. So I think that's honestly one of the coolest aspects of being able to play pro lacrosse, especially right out of college. So Yeah, I had that experience in the summer. So we ended up losing the playoffs to the Chaos and then got traded to the Outlaws in November. So excited to be refreshed and rejuvenated for year two, the PLL. And then this winter, like you mentioned, I was kind of getting the itch again to play. I got my body a little healthy, took the fall and winter to get healthy, and realized that I really miss playing lacrosse. So signed with the Seals in February. Spent the last half of the season learning the indoor game, which I think will help me out a little bit this summer. So
That transition from college to the pros, it's major pros and cons, right? It's so nice that you just came off of like being able to practice and play when all like the other returning pros, it takes them a little bit while to get used to it. So that first week at camp and first couple of games, you do have kind of a step on everyone, but at the same time, you've been practicing since September. So it's like a major, burnout potential and whatnot. I do kind of want to just hijack this conversation. We have a lot of parents and families that listen and, young student athletes. I got the chance to play with a guy at Syracuse, then went on to Notre Dame, David Lipko, I know you played with. And just, from talking back and forth, got to learn more about like your story, your recruiting story. You come from this phenomenal family of lacrosse players. But I was always told, by him, and it's been in the media a little bit, you weren't like the most hyped up of your brothers. Reading your resume, Deemer, at the start, I mean, that's like as much of a dream as anyone, right? Thornton, two-time national champion. You have all these stats, but can you talk about what that journey was like growing up with a brother that's a household name, growing up also with a younger brother who was a huge recruit as well. So just wanted to talk about that quickly.
yeah, I enjoy talking about it because I'm like really proud of the career that I ended up having after being such a late bloomer. Like I was at a PL junior event in January, and they have a player panel where we speak in front of a couple hundred parents and the kids that are there, and they asked everyone's recruiting story. And after I told mine, I had like all of like probably 30 parents come up to me, like mind blown that that was the case and how much it meant to their kids who are on the smaller side and are struggling with bigger kids that they're playing against. So yeah, I just my first day of high school, I was 4'10", 85 pounds, like not exaggerating one bit at all. I was just like the latest bloomer ever. And this is back when like playing in front of Petro on the sidelines and when I'm in seventh grade, like it was just the Wild West and there's no September 1st. So like all these ACC classes and IV everywhere, these spots were filled up by like the fall of your freshman year, pretty much when I was getting recruited. So that was extremely tough for me. Like I was 4'10" the fall of my freshman year, even my junior year, which is like pretty much every spot's taken by that point. I was like still like 5'4", like in the fall of my junior year. So like I honestly didn't even know if I was gonna play. Like I definitely was talented enough and skilled enough. That's where like you see all the stuff that I'm able to do, like behind the backs and like all that stuff. I would practice that stuff because I knew I had to have really good stick skills because I wasn't going to run by anyone. I couldn't beat anyone. I remember being guarded by Will Bowen in like fall, his Massachusetts team against my express team. He's like 6'4", and I was like literally 5 feet tall, like up to his kneecaps, playing in front of every D1 school in the country. So that was what I had. That was my high school experience. So I didn't really have any offers really until my senior year, going into my senior year. And I talked to Yale, BU, and luckily Notre Dame was like always a school that I wanted to end up at just naturally because of my older brother. And they like kind of weren't recruiting me, and that really pissed me off. And I used that as motivation when I was like training and all throughout high school, which is pretty funny. And I give Corrigan shit for that all the time. But yeah, no, luckily I hit a bit of a growth spurt going into my senior year that summer. And Notre Dame told me if I did a post grad year that I could become a class 2019 and they'd open up a spot for me. So I think it's good that parents are asking about that. And I'm definitely really fortunate for that experience because I don't think I have the career that I have if I wasn't such a late bloomer. I think a lot of guys are getting recruited and they're these man childs when they're like 14, 15, and they think they have it all, like the whole skill set, and they're getting all these looks, and then they commit their September 1st, their junior year, and then they stop trying, they stop getting better, and then those are the guys who never play in college. Like I like the guys who are more the late bloomer, diamond in the rough guys who just continue to put their head down and grind and get better. Yeah, I really take pride in my recruiting story and the journey that I went through.
Yeah, Pat, it's really cool to hear. And again, like Steven said in the beginning, like to go on to do what you did and then to have such a late blooming recruiting story is truly amazing. And I think like if you were to unpack it, there's probably so many things from, what you were saying where, hey, you were the smallest guy on the field. So you're really, trying to work on your stick skills. You're trying to find other ways to, beat people or make an impact. What I'm really curious about is sometimes in recruiting, some guys early on are highly rated, some guys are underrated, but sometimes to your point about the late bloomers, some people are just maybe rated, like they just are what they are, but they're just size wise not there yet, or something, is not there yet. And when you're in that spot, like how did you have the mental resiliency to keep pushing, to keep staying, whether it's positive or motivated, or, what were your parents and your brothers saying to you? Like you were probably one of the few people that really believed in yourself like you do, so like how did you stick with that?
Yeah, it was really tough, to be honest. A lot of things come to mind. Like I probably wouldn't have been able to do it and keep pushing without the support of my family. But at times it felt like even my own family was like in the back of my head, I was like, did they even believe I could do this? But so it was like kind of a mental battle with myself the entire time to just keep pushing. And I knew that I was talented enough to play at the highest level. It was just a matter of time where I hit that growth spurt. But yeah, I think my dad is like, honestly, my dad, all my siblings, my family is my biggest supporters, and they all knew how skilled and talented I was, and they knew that I have the competitive drive to be a great player. So, and I think another tough aspect of it was while all this was going down, Matt was like arguably the best player in the country for a few years at Notre Dame. So I'd step onto the field, and all these kids are like chirping me, telling me I'm a disgrace to my family, like never going to be as good as my brother. So I think that continued to motivate me as well. And that was like, it's pretty tough as like a high schooler. My brother's my idol, hearing that dreams to play at Notre Dame. And I'm like not doing as well and getting chirped for whatever. But yeah, I think it was a combination of that. And just my dad is just like one of the most competitive people on planet Earth, in my opinion. His like impact on us is reflected in how we play. I think he just grew up like extremely blue collar mentality, and I mentioned it to you guys when I joined the call before, but we love hockey, and you kind of see it reflect in our style of play, like forechecking, ground balls, like just playing as hard as possible. I think we just brought that mentality to lacrosse, and yeah, so a combination of a bunch of different things, but definitely wasn't easy, but I'm really fortunate that it happened.
Pat, I'm curious. I actually didn't know a lot of this background, and just a little caveat for people listening. In the last few years, kids can't get recruited till after September 1st, but there was a period of time prior to that, as Pat mentioned too, where the date kept creeping earlier. And for a lot of us, we had classmates that were getting recruited. Like in my year and Deemer's year, it was like sophomore year, kids were getting recruited, and then it kept going earlier. So what Pat's talking about is it got to a point where kids were literally getting recruited in 8th and 9th grade by coaches. And Pat, I'm wondering, did you ever almost like get to a point where I'm sure you got some offers from maybe schools that like were less desirable to you throughout the process? How did you balance like deciding not to go that route and just like having so much faith that eventually something would work out? Did you ever like consider taking one of those offers throughout the journey?
Yeah, another school I didn't mention. So at Notre Dame, we do this thing where like we do senior speeches the Friday before every home game. Senior will go up and basically talk about his why, or like you could really take it any angle you want to go. You could give your life story, or whatever, like just a way for guys to get to know the guys, the senior class on a deeper level. And I kind of told like my entire backstory, my recruiting story and journey my family has had through Notre Dame and all that stuff. And I just remembered like a piece from that story. It was the first like coach that like really, really wanted me. It was John Galloway. And I remember vividly receiving that text from him. And it was just like, it was such a cool moment because I'd just going from a guy who would like watch his brother have so much success, and none of these coaches were really that interested in me. I just thought it was so cool that a coach really like thought I was a great player and was expressing that interest. So Yeah, Jacksonville, Coach Galloway was like the first major D1 school that showed any interest, and that was really cool. And I still think about that all the time. But it's pretty funny. I have an email with Lars Tiffany that I still look at every now and then. I would look at it before every time we played Virginia. I emailed him trying to go to UVA because I don't know. I thought maybe he'd take a chance on me and emailed back like our recruiting class is full. If we think you could make an impact, we'll circle back or something. Never heard back from him. So I think that was pretty funny one from my recruiting story too. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just kept my head down and just trusted that it would work out in the end. I always was just holding out for Notre Dame the entire time, just like praying that I would play well enough in front of Byrne or Corrigan and they would change their mind and be interested. And then I think it was the Long Island underclass tryouts going into my senior year summer. So I tried out for that team knowing I was going to take a PG year anyway, pretty much, even if it wasn't Notre Dame, because of just physically being a late bloomer. I thought it would help. And then Coach Byrne texted me after that tryout, which is like a dream come true. Remember studying for finals and in the library, getting that text, and yeah, that was one of the coolest moments of my life.
You don't always know too, like something we come up a lot when we're talking with families around event schedules. You don't always know how you're going to get seen either. It's really hard to predict. Like you can do all the right events, but coaches are talking amongst coaches and they're catching half two when you had a sick half number one. And there's not this perfect recipe. Like similar story for me. I remember top 205 was a big camp. By the time like we were going through it, like I didn't get invited to blue chip. I could run you down like every college coach that didn't recruit me. And I'm sure Steven and Matt could do the same. And we can all like share in those like recruiting vendettas, but didn't get invited to blue chip. And I did top 205, which at the time was actually the top 605. That
Top
was something.
605. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. There was 600 kids there, not 200. So you didn't know what you were going to get. And I remember, Stephen Brundage, who was at Princeton at the time, had drafted me to his team. And that 5 or 6 games, like playing for him, ended up just being like this massive game changer for my recruiting. So like on one hand, you could say, oh man, this event sucks. Like there's so many kids, but just that one, meaningful experience or time in front of that certain coach, like that was the light bulb, and they ended up being in my top 2. It was Princeton and Duke for me at the end of the road. So you just, kind of to say like whether it's the Long Island tryout, or that you almost didn't do, like you never know what it's going to be that's going to get you over the edge.
Another thing I just thought is actually pretty funny. So my brother Brendan played at Hofstra. He's O coordinator at Iona this year. It's their first year D1. I think the year that Kevin Unterstein got hired at UNC was like in the middle of all of this, like me and my recruiting. I still wasn't committed anywhere. And while this is happening, which is also another aspect of this whole thing that made it tough on me, was Chris is like the best player in the country since he's like in 5th grade. Everyone like, it's like him and Andrew McAdory since they were literally probably 10 years old. Everyone was like, these two are by far the best players in their class. So everyone knew, like I knew Chris was going to get any school he wanted to, and all these schools are going to want him. So I think either Brendan or my dad reached out to Understein and was like, if you take Pat, like Chris will go to North Carolina. Like we were always trying to be a package deal. And since Notre Dame wasn't recruiting me, I was like trying to go, honestly, like anywhere but Notre Dame for a little bit, just to like try and get back to Corrigan, which is pretty funny now to think about. But so yeah, no, UNC and Virginia didn't take the bait.
It's pretty funny to like just hear all about this. Like, I mean, your process obviously like sucked. I think it also built you up into like the type of person and player you are. Like you went through that, but you get to Notre Dame and you like hit the ground running completely. Your first season is that 2020 season. And obviously that was cut short after like 4 or 5 games. But I remember watching you. We hadn't played you guys yet. And I was like, oh, this kid's like very good. And you were one of Notre Dame's like top guys. Then fast forward to 2021, that's your first full season at Notre Dame. You completely dominated. I remember playing you guys twice. I think you had 20 points against us in 2 games. You were like the last add to the tour. And at that time, I thought you were like phenomenal. You were like a big reason why we lost to you guys. And I just remember seeing you like not added to that list, but then you end up being a Tewaaraton finalist in that first full year, your redshirt freshman year. So can you just talk about what that was like? I guess like once you finally got there, right? You completely hit the ground running, and obviously it flourished into this phenomenal career that you did end up having.
Freshman year, I thought I was having a good season, but I remember we played against, I had a bunch of points against like Cleveland State and Richmond, I think, in our first 2 games. And then we played Maryland, which was like my first real test, and Maycar was covering me. And that was like my welcome to college lacrosse. I think I had like 1 point, and it was with like 2 minutes left in the game. We were getting blown out. So, and then we played Denver the next weekend. Colin Squires was covering me, and I didn't really do much either. Like I was still like kind of in my, I was still growing into my body physically. I was the same height I am now, but I was still only like 170 pounds, maybe if that. But so that was when I was like, wow, like I really need to figure out how to get a step faster, or like put on weight or something. Like these defenders in D1 or number 1 cover guys are no joke. So then COVID happened, and I just spent like the next however many months that was just working out, trying to get stronger, and then just kept growing into my body physically. Came back sophomore year, and then got COVID like 2 weeks before the season started. And then I was on the scout team attack for like the first couple weeks of before my sophomore year. And it took Corrigan like a while to put me back on like with the starters. Like I honestly didn't even know if I was going to start on attack as a sophomore. Like I had a good, decent freshman year, but it was shortened season, like not a full sample size. And then it's kind of like a little scared for a little bit, not knowing what like my career would turn out to be for a few weeks there, but ended up starting. And then I don't know, I just had a ton of confidence and felt faster. And I think it was that game in the Dome against you guys, Steven, where like I just really like flipped a switch, and from that point on I just played with like so much confidence the rest of my career. And just I don't know, I think to play well, like you definitely have to have a certain level of delusional confidence, and I think I had that my sophomore year. Like I was still pretty young at that point, but in my mind I thought I was definitely one of the best players in the country. So we had a great team that year and came up short to a legendary Maryland team in the quarterfinals, but all worked out from there.
I do want to hit quick on that idea of delusional confidence, because I do want to get into more Notre Dame talk for sure. But I've never heard that before. And when I think of when we were talking about, again, congrats to your brother on an amazing career and retirement. We all probably shot Matt a text and, gave him a shout out. But when I think of playing against him, and when I think of watching you and your brother, like something that stands out to me is that it's like, no matter what the score is, like those guys are running around like crazy, as if like they're not impacted ever by the score, and you're playing with that confidence and that swagger. And I think that's been a huge part of like last couple of years of you guys having success. And I know that was a foundation off of like what your brother left behind. So like, where does that come from? What is that delusional confidence that you're like feeling as a sophomore that you're the best player in the country and you're using that to your advantage?
Yeah. I think honestly, a lot of it comes from just being undersized, like as a family, as a whole. Like, I don't know, I think naturally bigger guys kind of not a free pass, but people see a bigger statured guy, and they'll kind of overlook the smaller guy to a sense. So I think a lot of it is just having like that chip on your shoulder as a smaller guy, and like knowing that if there is an evaluation between a smaller player, like same type player, but one of the guys is bigger and one of the guys is smaller, like majority of people think the guy who's bigger is a better player. So yeah, I think a lot of it just comes from having that chip on your shoulder. And I don't know, not to prove people wrong, but a lot of it was just from trying to prove like Coach Corrigan right for taking a chance on me throughout my entire career. I think the same thing with Matt and Chris. So not that we're like holding these vendettas against people. I think it's just all for like, that's just how we were raised. Like I touched on it with my dad, but like he always preached just like playing harder than everyone. Like didn't care about points, anything. It's like if you were going to the goal and you turned the ball over, like he was proud because you're sprinting as hard as you can to the goal. So I think just having that mindset instilled in us from like since we were as long as I can remember, literally 5 years old. My dad's like being crazy with us. So yeah, I don't think any of us have the careers or play styles we have without my parents' influence on us. So yeah, I think that's where the delusional confidence comes from.
Well, it's just like I like hearing your story, Pat, because I feel like everybody's kind of got one, but you see Pat, and like for me, it was like I played against your brother Matt all the time, and I watched you play, I watched Chris play, and people notice you when you have success. So like Steven kind of said earlier in Deemer intro, like Georgetown winner, 2-time champion. It's easy to assume that like you were always the best player, and nobody's going to go back and like check that, right? And it's easy to assume that like, everybody looked at the players that have had success. We're like, man, I wish I could like just be that good. And it's cool to hear that like, well, there was a long road to getting there. And what you really focused on was, not just being the points leader, you just focused on playing hard. And to your point, like I played against Matt all the time. And I told you before the call, like he was the pain in the ass to play against, like mentally, but also physically, because he was smaller and I'm taller. So when I had to cover him, like when he changed direction, like he was like below my head,
touching the ground. Yeah.
Basically, if you like, there's photos of him changing direction, and
his
like
knees are basically on the ground.
Yeah, he's like almost horizontal, and so that was challenging in itself. And if people don't know, like Matt Kavanagh just retired from professional lacrosse, was a long time one of the greatest players in the game. But what made him hard is even when Matt wasn't having a good game, like if he wasn't hitting the cage or something, like he didn't act like it. And so like it's nice to if I'm covering a guy, if they're having a bad game and they start playing poorly, they might like pass the ball more and like not dodge, and they might stop riding, and Matt just like never let you off the hook. And that just meant like no matter what, and you knew that going into the game, like if I'm not on my game, like Matt might be playing like his worst game ever, but in the fourth quarter, he might like ride it back with me and score the game winning goal. And you always knew that could happen because it wasn't about like what was happening. He just always played that hard.
Like you kind of just mentioned it, like even the games where we don't have a ton of points or like not filling up the stat sheet and having a couple turnovers, we always knew we could have some sort of an impact on the game and like just create chaos out there, like on the ride or picking up the big ground ball or laying someone out, like literally any aspect where we could have an impact and try and create some momentum. I think those are where we found our edges and kind of separated our play styles and stood out a little bit from like your prototypical lacrosse player. So,
all right, I got one last quick question before we just switch over to some, present day stuff. Was 50 open when you got to Notre Dame? Because I know you took 51, your brother took 50. Is there anything there?
Yeah, that was Ryder senior year when I was a PG. I knew it'd be open. And then our director of ops, he sends like a Google form out to fill out your first like couple number choices you want. And I was just sitting there thinking about it. Like Matt made it legendary, like gave it in left in Ryder's locker after they lost to Denver in that Final Four game. Ryder wore it for a few years. This is still when I'm like, I don't know what the hell is going to happen in college. I don't know if I'm going to play. Like, I don't want to wear this number sitting on the bench. Like, I didn't want the pressure, to be honest, like at all. So I was like, I don't know. I just chose. I thought 51 looked cool. Like one up from 50, create my own identity and not like ride the coattails of Matt throughout my whole career. And I also loved watching Jeff Teed at Cornell. So I thought it was a pretty cool number. Made something out of it, which is pretty cool. And then Chris came in and took 50, which I think ended up being really cool.
Yeah, I like that. That is cool. I didn't know that. Flipping the script, you've mentioned Coach Corrigan a couple different times. Curious just to hear, about him in general. And, he's been there for so long. Obviously all his success has really, really paid off in the last couple of years. But Notre Dame has been, a force for a while. But what do you think that he does like exceptionally well, as a coach and the leader of the program?
I think his consistency throughout his entire career, like the little things that he preaches on a daily basis, he's probably doing that in 1988 or whatever, whenever he took over the program when he was like a 27-year-old coach. Like he is just like so dialed on the most minute details you could ever think of. I just remember sitting in these film sessions throughout college and something where like I wasn't even paying attention to this part of the play, like the smallest aspect of a play, like where like a defenseman in the slide rolls, like hips are facing, or like just like these tiny little details that Coach Corrigan is just like a lacrosse savant. So it's like really cool learning from him. And I think he's a really good like life mentor and always has your back. And just what he's done with the program is insanely impressive. Just to be that persistent for that long without winning a national championship. And always the knock on him was that he was a great coach, but he can't he can't win the championship. Like, he got there a few times, and that was always the knock on him, was that he couldn't get it done. And I don't know, it was just like such a out of body experience seeing him holding the trophy. And I meant to do it in another one, like after not winning for that long. It's pretty cool. So me and him have, I'd say, a really, really strong relationship, and it was an honor to play for that guy. Like, I think he's one of the biggest legends in the sport. So yeah, forever indebted to Coach Corrigan for sure. And I think it's really cool. Like, one of the coolest aspects of winning is it makes recruiting a lot easier. So he had to kind of really grind to find these diamond in the rough guys throughout the early stages of his career. Like, guys are obviously, Notre Dame's a great school, but it wasn't as great of a lacrosse program. I think guys were really stepping out of their comfort zone, going to some school in the middle of Indiana where not a great program, not funded very well. And then now to see like him getting consistently these 5-star players, I think it's really cool, and he deserves it. So,
well, and now, like, I think the interesting thing that comes with that is then, even you think about your experience to get to Notre Dame, like you had to scratch and claw and do everything to get there. Now you're also getting, top flight guys, but what's going to be important, I can only imagine, is, hey, like, now you have guys coming from a different level in some cases, like the quote unquote high price talent, like, and then like, how do you get them to, mesh into the culture of Notre Dame lacrosse, right? Like,
exactly.
That's like the $1 million question for any coach in recruiting, and to your point, like, maybe it's that his consistency of how he's run the program for all these years is going to be what's going to be huge for that, to have, guys like Matt Jeffrey coming in, Faison coming in, like getting a lot of attention, but playing Notre Dame lacrosse. Like, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I talked to him about it a little bit. I like, how are you handling like being able to recruit, like pretty much getting the pick of the litter, anyone you want? And he said like he's not going to change like how he vets these guys. I think one of the coolest aspects of playing at Notre Dame is like, guys were from all over the country, but we had such a close locker room because he did a great job. Like, the coaches do a great job of vetting these guys, not trying to bring in like kids that can sabotage a locker room. Because you guys know it really well. You guys all played college lacrosse, pro lacrosse. Like, there can be a few guys who could really sabotage a locker room, and I think culture wins championships. So that aspect of it is really, really important, bringing in the right guys. So I think he's done a great job, even with the opportunity to pick from whoever he wants. So it definitely makes it a little more challenging, I think, for sure.
Pat, speaking of that culture, I think one of the hardest things people say to do in sports is to repeat a championship, right? You win and you finally did it. Can you talk about, like, I'm sure you enjoy the summer, all that. Can you talk about how, like, the culture, Coach Corrigan, the leadership on the team approached 2024, after 2023, 2024, after the 2023 championship?
I mean, I would be remiss to not touch a little bit on 2023, like after we didn't make the tournament in 2022. I think there's a lot of aspects of our program that not me, but like the senior class, like there were a few guys who were returning for their senior year that kind of got together after we didn't make the tournament, probably within 24 and 48 hours, and sat down and started having meetings right away, like trying to strategize, figure out what needs to change about our locker room, our culture, to get over the hump. Like, there were no games being played. We were just like incredibly serious about every single detail, like running through these different scenarios, like what do we need to get rid of, what do we need to add. And I think we just like not overhauled the culture, but we made some significant changes. I think started taking lacrosse a lot more seriously. Obviously, you're a college student and you want to enjoy yourself, but I think we enjoyed ourselves like a little too much, honestly. So there's some social stuff we needed to change. Not that we weren't having fun, because I think that is a big aspect of your team. Camaraderie needs to be there to create a strong culture. But yeah, I'd definitely say like we took it a lot more serious, and we made some substantial changes, and then brought in some great transfers, like Brian Tevlin's solo captain at Yale 2 times. Like he's one of the best teammates, leaders, like just a renaissance man, like the ultimate. Like if you want to win a championship, like having Brian Tevlin on your team is going to give you a significant advantage to do that. So we brought in some great guys, and then it ended up winning it in 23. And then I think at 24, it's like you said, it's insanely hard to repeat. And we knew that. And we were kind of not arrogant in the fall, but I think we were on our high horse for a little too long. And then we scrimmaged Princeton and we lost like 20-5. Like it was the most embarrassing thing I've ever been a part of. And then I think that was like the turning point, biggest wake up call that we've had in a while. So to go from winning and then going into the fall, like we're going to win again, like not really putting in as much work, not doing the little details, taking everything as serious as we did the entire year. Like there wasn't one day in 2022, 2023 where I didn't have full confidence that we were winning the national championship. Like I was so confident in that team. Like our cultures, our team was just so close. And then 2024, like you kind of start questioning things. You lose by 15 to Princeton, and team's kind of all out of whack. Corrigan's losing his mind on us. And then I think it was that Georgetown loss in the spring that where we really were like, that was very eye-opening. And then from there, we didn't lose another. I think we won 15 straight games. So, yeah, it was definitely like, wouldn't say it was perfect. Like it may look perfect. People are saying arguably we were the best team of all time or whatever. But I think every team goes through difficulties and ups and downs and these ebbs and flows throughout a year that are very natural, and you just got to stay persistent. And so I say the culture wins the championship, because I think you just revert back to your culture and how close you are as a team to win you those games at the end of the year. Guys buying into doing the little plays, diving for end lines. If you just establish that on a daily basis at your practices, at a fall practice that's meaningless on a Tuesday in September, like you're going to be doing that on Memorial Day weekend, because guys won't think twice about it. So
I remember going off that too, like thinking about my sophomore year, there ended up being like juniors and seniors that stepped up into roles that, in February, no one in the media would be talking about or expecting, when it comes to like guys that are going to be impactful, and obviously, when you look at last year's team and you see like your brother, Entenmann, like you see all these different guys, like I'm sure like, again, the third and fourth guy on the rope unit, or the guy that's taking wings, or the second LSM, like everyone has to be ready to step up to make those plays, to be able to at any given time, like overcome all these good opponents, and now Notre Dame's in position to, again, still control their own destiny, and I tweeted it earlier this week, like you got to win 4 games, from here on out to be champions. And so they've got a big one in Ohio State, traveling to Ohio State. But it's, again, like whether or not you've been up and down from fall to spring, like now you've got a whole new season.
Exactly. Yeah, now you mentioned that you just got to win 4 games. The kid, him well, Deemer, the kid Jack Simmons, who transferred from Virginia to Notre Dame. He's the only player since I think the Princeton teams in the 90s with 3 national championships in the modern era. And he would always make the joke, like, it's not that easy, boys. You just need to win 4 games. He went 3 for 4. Like, crazy.
I was just thinking of Jack when you were talking about transfers. I got to coach him at McDonough. He was committed to Georgetown, changed his mind to Virginia, does 4 years, wins 2 titles there, and comes to you guys and wins a 5th. And he's in New York City now. He's a great kid. He made some big plays for you guys down the stretch, so I was always pulling for him along the way too.
He's a legend. But yeah, no, it is like the playoffs are crazy. Like anything can happen. You just touched on it. Whatever happened in the beginning of the year, the whole season doesn't matter. We had like the best regular season, the best resume in tournament history, like 6 or 7 top 5 wins. I think it ended up being something crazy. And then we're down like 1 or 2 at halftime in the first round of Albany. We're all sitting there like, what the fuck is going on? Like, so like anything can happen. So that's the best part about it. 1 game elimination game.
How do you feel with this current Notre Dame team, going on the road to Ohio State? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the game of the weekend that everyone's most excited for. Definitely a lot of hype behind it right when the selection show happened, but I don't know. I think it's going to be a battle. Ohio State's very good. Their defense, I always thought their defense was very tough to play against throughout college. Coach Myers, I think those guys play really hard, and they don't have like big name studs on offense, but their offense like moves the ball really well. That kid Marinier like has an awesome shot. He can fill it up, and I don't know. I think they're just always a really tough team to play against. The kid Van Buren's one of the best close guys in the country. The kid Colin Brown is unbelievable too, down low for them, and Fayak obviously is playing lights out. So I think it's going to be a really, really tight matchup. And Notre Dame, they struggled offensively against them in the beginning of the year, but they were kind of still finding themselves. So I think it will look a little different than it did back in March. But stylistically, I think it's going to be a tight game down to the wire.
Pat, are you and the family flying to Columbus this weekend?
No, I don't know. I'm still looking at flights. Hopefully they are a little cheaper today. I've been waiting for the prices to come down, but it's tough. Sunday at noon's kind of a tough time slot, but maybe I'll figure it out and drive there or something. It's 8 hours. So yeah, that's tough part about playing indoor this year is I wasn't able to catch many of Chris's games in person. I only went to the Maryland game at Georgia because that was our bye week, but so I haven't gotten back to Arlotta. I was praying that they were hosting a game so I could go back to Arlotta for Chris's last game there. But I think being a road dog in round one is pretty cool opportunity for them.
Definitely takes the pressure off. Obviously I think headlines around some of the seeding and the geographic stuff that we'll probably touch on later in the show around travel and first round and what the NCAA is willing to pay for. But at the same time, like any team's got to knock off great teams to win, whether it's the first round, the quarterfinals. I remember, I think it was our freshman year, we were playing Loyola, defending champs, so coming off 2012. So there's really no easy games, Richmond, North Carolina, we'll touch on more in the show, but Pat, absolutely a blast having you on, man. We appreciate your time. We've always been big fans of your game and, your mentality and I've loved watching the whole Kavanagh family and competing against them along the way. So wishing you the best and your brother the best and, good luck this summer in the PLL.
Awesome. Thanks guys for having me. I had a blast. Appreciate it.
I didn't know a lot of that story about Pat, to be honest. I kind of just thought he was always a good, the point I made earlier is like, that was me that thought that he was always just one of the best players. And you see them play, you see Chris play. I played against Matt, played against Brennan. The thing that really stood out to me, I think like down the stretch was him just talking about the culture at Notre Dame and how they bought in. But he kind of talks about his whole career about how that's the way he viewed the game of playing hard, doing things in his control, no matter what happened. His dad was like encouraging him when they played hard, not when he scored a goal or like didn't drop the pass or something. And you just hear that consistently throughout the conversation. And you look at the best teams, like they all buy into that kind of mindset. And I think when you talk about that Notre Dame team, culture and buying in, it's like when your team buys into a consistent culture like that, you have confidence as a team because you've all made sacrifices. You've all chosen to prioritize things over other things that benefit the team over things that don't. And so when you do that consistently, when he said, like, I knew we were going to win a championship that year, I had so much faith in that team, so much trust in that team had such great culture. Well, the teammates had earned that trust and that confidence and that culture over the course of like the decisions they've made. And it was cool to hear him say it because I remember being part of teams where I felt that and being part of teams where we would get in the playoffs. And I kind of felt like we probably didn't deserve to win the championship that year because there was guys not bought in, but we were winning games. And then there was teams where I was like, we deserve to be here. We've given up so much to be here and we've worked so hard to be here. And we lost the championship that year, my senior year, but like the feeling was so different. And so I could relate to him saying that was kind of cool just to hear his experience with all of that.
Yeah, I think it's also just like I was impressed by the maturity of like after they missed the tournament in 2022, like just having an actual reset and being like, all right, what are we going to change, instead of being like, oh, the committee should have let us in, like we were doing, great, and we got screwed over, right? Instead of like pointing the finger, it's, looking internally, seeing what's up with the program and what can we fix. And to do that, when you're actually in it and when you're in college and, fresh off like a sophomore year, I do find that impressive. And, obviously it worked out well.
It also speaks to just the idea that you can do all the right things and the outcome doesn't always go your way. You can at times maybe not do all the right things and the outcome still, does go your way. But it does all speak to like process over outcome, and whenever your career's done, whenever your season's over as a team, not there's only one team raising the trophy. So what you can still fall back on and feel proud of is the effort that you put in along the way. And I really, Pat's message around his dad and that support resonated with me a lot, because I think about my parents who didn't play lacrosse. They could have cared less what sports I played, but they cared that it was 100% effort and that I had as good of an attitude as possible. And if I did those things, and, kind of a great teammate falls into that, but if I did those things, like they were happy, they were proud of me. And I think that, the pressure I always felt was just the one that I put on myself. But that to me, like, just really speaks to the process. And that's, again, none of us are parents. We can't say like parents should do this and every situation is different, but that seems to be a theme, of, how you can support your athlete in terms of the focus and bringing them back to the process as well.
When I was getting recruited, and we've talked about it before, I committed to Maryland of May of my junior year. And we had kids that committed in their sophomore year in our class. And it was a really stressful time. The whole fall, I was like, and that's why I was asking Pat those questions. And Deemer, you asked a great question about mentally how he handled it. And I was like, did you ever think about going to another school? Because there was times in that fall where I got offers from other schools that I didn't really want to go to, but I was so tired of watching everybody else commit. I was like stressed of not going, not being committed to a school. And I thought all the opportunities would go away. And I'm not going to say the school, but it was a Division I school that was like a mid D1 lower. And I got an offer from them. I told my parents, like, I think I just want to commit there. And this was before a lot of kids decommitted. So like for the most part, if you committed to a school, you were probably going to that school. And they were just like, do you really want, do you really want to go to this school? Or are you doing this to like, just to relieve, just to do it because you feel like you have to? And I was like, I don't know that I really want to go to school. And they're like, well, why don't you just trust this process and see how the spring goes, right? If you just, and they didn't know much about recruiting, but they were like, if you don't want to go there, like, I don't think it's the right thing to commit to that school. And I know it's uncomfortable, but can you stick it out? And I remember that I was like, it would have been the wrong thing to commit to that school. And it worked out for me. And it could have worked out many different ways, but I remember that specifically. And I don't know what the takeaway is there, because it's not going to work out for everybody, but that's advice I give. Like, if it doesn't feel right, don't feel pressured to do it, because then a right thing will emerge, and it might not be the thing you thought it was going to be. But I think just doing it out of this fear or anxiety is probably the wrong path towards choosing the place for you.
Yeah, and it takes maturity and discipline around the player and on the parents. I think it's really tough, but I do think you just hear so many stories of people waiting for what they actually do want. They end up usually being a little bit, not a little bit, but happier in the end, which I think matters. And I think, Deemer, you were just saying with your parents, being hard on you or not. And it's not about I don't really know anyone at the college level, maybe you guys did, but I doubt it, that their parents were really hard on them about getting a certain number of goals, assists, and points that ended up being a great player, right? That's just for all parents. I'm not a parent. None of us are parents, but I just think that's a really, interesting topic, just in terms of obviously parents really care and players really care, but it's important to be hard on them and about the right things, right? Like playing hard, being a good teammate and whatnot. Those are kind of non-negotiables. But when it comes to performance, you kind of have to leave it to the player there, which I do think is important. Wanted to switch gears here, unless you guys have something else. Jim, are you good?
I was just gonna say, going off of that, what I've learned from even some of our conversations with Ken Ziegler, we've done 2 parent webinars for our parent community. If you haven't checked those out, you can check out our community page and subscribe. And the way that he advises around just the language that you use, I think is something that anyone can always assess, whether you're coaching, you're parenting, you're teaching. And so while the extremes of, hey, getting in the car and being like so mad at your kid for not scoring X amount of goals, that might be 1 in 1,000. That might be 1 in 10,000, maybe less, maybe more. But probably the more reality is like just certain types of language used in conversation that probably elicits like different stress that someone might not even be realizing, right? So I think like, just to say that there's probably always things that can be learned when it comes to that maybe framing something differently allows your advice to be heard better by a student athlete or a player. So I think that's also like, takeaways for me is that sometimes these situations aren't always so extreme. But it's, simple things that, you can reframe in the discussion that could be more supportive. But yeah, I think with that, guys, let's switch gears here. Steve, why don't you kick us off for the preview of the weekend, and let's get into things here because we got a lot of exciting lacrosse coming up for round 1.
Yeah, so huge weekend coming up. This is the weekend that everyone's waiting for, that everyone's been playing towards. Was a pretty clear selection Sunday this past Sunday. We are recording this on Wednesday. This will drop Friday. So we'll have the playing games today. But I think, just in terms, I think Army is probably the first team out. So they didn't make it after they lost to Colgate in the semifinals. But we've got, and we've been saying this all year, like there are going to be really, really good games. And we have a really nice slate of games. I'll just read them off quickly and then we can, talk about a few. We don't have to go into all of them. But, to start off the weekend, we got Richmond at UNC at noon. I think that's an awesome game. We've got Towson at Princeton at 2:30. That Princeton-Cornell Ivy final was electric. Colgate at Penn State at 5 p.m. on Saturday. That's a repeat of an earlier season game. And last year, Colgate beat Penn State in the first game of the season, so those teams have history is kind of my point there. Georgetown at Duke, 7:30 Saturday night. That's another great game. Georgetown just continuing to, I think it was their 7th straight Big East title, maybe more. And Duke, who I think has, an incredibly strong defense. They didn't come away with the ACC championship, but I still think they're a great team. Flipping over to Sunday, the 2 games we know that we'll have, Notre Dame at Ohio State, which we've discussed a little bit. That's probably the biggest, game on the schedule, not only because the teams are good, but for anyone that's not totally in tune, Ohio State beat Notre Dame earlier this season. That really put Ohio State on the map and I think made everyone take them seriously. But also Ohio State got the 4 seed after winning the Big Ten championship. So I have a couple thoughts on that and we can go into it or not, and then Harvard at Syracuse. So our 3rd game, that's going to be a rematch, which I just find interesting from the committee that we're having 3 repeat games. But Harvard will be back at Syracuse. Rematch of that game that, Syracuse dominated in all facets of the game and Harvard walked out of the dome with a 15-4 victory. So looking forward to that one. Like I said, that one will be Saturday at 5 p.m. Cornell will have the last game of the weekend. And they will play the winner of Albany-Siena. And then Maryland is going to play at 2:30 on Sunday. They'll play the winner of Robert Morris Air Force, who by the time this comes out, we'll know who won those games. But I think just across the board, really exciting games coming up this weekend. Really feels like one of those years where like the tournament is pretty wide open. Like, yes, Cornell is the 1 seed. Their only loss on the season is to Penn State. Maryland's obviously incredibly talented, and you cannot count John Tillman out at all. Princeton with the 3 seed. The only team that's really given them troubles this year is Cornell. And then you have Ohio State, who just won the Big Ten. Like that's a team to obviously take note of. And then, as I could just continue to go on and on, but curious your guys' kind of thoughts, reactions, excitement. How are you guys feeling for this weekend?
I think it's the best time of year for lacrosse. I think in some regards, it sucks for Army in particular, I think. And I think that's part of it. We've seen that the past, I mean, probably for as long as the tournament's been going on. It's not every year, but every couple years, there's a really good team that is able to win the national championship that doesn't get in. And that's actually something I think we should maybe touch on a little bit. Not that I'm an expert on it, but I have some things I want to talk about there. Otherwise, like a lot of great games. I think generally, like it's a pretty pretty good bracket. The one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was just like what like the selection criterion, like what like how is the bracket selected? And not just based off of like the NCAA website and understanding this. Anybody that coaches or is involved with like high school lacrosse and playoffs and all that, maybe your league has a criteria, maybe they don't. Like there's a criteria for the NCAA selection committee, and it's certainly not perfect. But they do follow like some logic of how they do things, which is strength of schedule, results of RPI, head-to-head competition, and then like input from an advisory committee. So I think like a lot of people get frustrated, and the reason some great teams get left out is because it doesn't really solve for the best teams all the time. It solves for the most deserving teams based off a set of criteria. And I think you could certainly make the case like Army's a championship caliber team if you look at them, but they're just like certain metrics in strength of schedule and RPI weren't quite what they needed to be, because quite frankly, some teams they probably thought were going to be bigger wins, just tend like, a Yale or a Rutgers or whoever tended just like didn't turn out to be as competitive, which hurt them in the long run there.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like I don't have personally like a ton of solutions or adjustments. I think anyone's always going to feel biased towards like their team getting in or not getting in or getting a higher seed. But again, this is the criteria. I think the hard part as well being just the amount of AQs and the size of the tournament. It would be great, to see 2 more slots, 4 more slots, because it always feels like every year the 2 to 4 bubble teams that get left out are teams that could be capable of a first round upset, so I think that's, that would be great to see. But again, there's just so much that goes into it, even to just, financially, which I think that also, speaks to sometimes like frustration around some seedings, and I think that's, you kind of alluded to it, Stephen, like the Ohio State Notre Dame, rematch, and the Midwestern component to the bracket, which is also happening in a few instances on the women's side. So I think that's probably the more unfortunate thing that continues to happen until this criteria of the seedings is changed, and where the matchups lie.
Yeah, I think so much of this comes down to, and we talked about it a little bit, at the start of the season, but like it comes down to what your schedule looks like. And I think people sometimes don't realize how hard it can be for the head coaches to schedule these games, right? You don't have the same schedule every single year. And, maybe some games don't work for schools that work for you. They were talking, I think, on ESPN, how I think they were saying how Army took off Syracuse and they took off Cornell. I don't know the ins and outs of that. I don't know what went down with that, but it doesn't mean that Army was like, oh, we don't want to play you. Maybe it didn't fit in Syracuse's schedule. Maybe it didn't fit into Cornell's schedule. And then that hurts you, right? You take a look at Army's schedule and it's just really relative to all the teams that made it from an at-large perspective, their schedule just doesn't really match up to them, right? So then it puts extra pressure on them. It's like, well, you got to win every single game, right? So they lose to BU once during the year, then they lose in the semifinals of the Patriot League, and suddenly you're on the outside looking in, right? It happens really quickly. Whereas Harvard, the Ivy League is a little bit more competitive than the Patriot League in terms of, you got Cornell and Princeton, they're the top 3 seeds, and they never beat them, but that raises their strength of schedule. And then they have an out of conference game in Syracuse, who that win ends up getting them in, right? They beat Syracuse, and then Syracuse ends up winning the ACC tournament. So that makes that win just look that much stronger. Army's biggest win is versus Carolina, and then Carolina loses in the first round of the ACC tournament. So that win still strong, but not as strong. So, I think a lot of it goes into that, and you can't fault people. I think people sometimes, like in 2022, Kevin Corrigan, he always has a really difficult schedule with Notre Dame. They don't play many games, but then it's like, all right, you got to perform in these games, right? And they just didn't. They slipped in one too many games, and then they're on the outside looking in. So, it comes down to the schedule, and then just you got to perform, accordingly to your schedule with this, which sounds super basic, but it's just what it comes down to. I think, outside of that, the biggest storyline is exactly what you're saying, Deemer. It's like, why are we still in this position in lacrosse where we're taking the travel into consideration? And, it has to come down to money at some point. But, the fact that Ohio State wins and it's like, oh, congratulations, you won the Big Ten championship. Like, here's Notre Dame, back-to-back champs are coming to you on the road, and you have to win big games. But just think that's something that hopefully, within the next couple of years or, decade is going to be adjusted so that, the criteria is they seed the first 8 teams, right? And then from there, those are the home teams. And then they send accordingly to like travel for the next one. So they're not necessarily seeding those next 8, which becomes unfortunate, which I think is why we're where we are. And, even flipping to like the women's side, I said it right when I saw Deemer on the call today. I was like, oh, Michigan, his sister plays there. I'm like, Michigan again, they're always in Northwestern's bracket, or like, Denver and Stanford, they're playing each other again. So it's just how it goes. It's where lacrosse is right now. There's nothing that, we can do about it here, but I think just continuing to talk about it. And I think it's something that, it's going to change at some point. I just don't know when.
Yeah, I would say if I'm looking at the first round to quarters to semis on the women's side, obviously UNC, BC, Northwestern, 1, 2, 3, so they're on paths to meet in the Final Four. But then when I look at so many of the others, I'm looking at like so many rematches early where it would just be nice to see some new teams play each other. Like I feel like, again, Loyola, Stony Brook, Cuse, kind of all in that same realm, like, possible Brown Yale rematch or Cuse Yale rematch if both those teams win. And then on the lower side, you've got Maryland, Michigan, and Northwestern, 3 of the top 4 teams, all in the same, quarter of the bracket. Like that's just insane for like one of the top conferences. And then you've got Hopkins in a different part, so, and then you got Virginia, James Madison, Duke, Florida, all in like this Southern realm. And so, look, I also haven't spent enough time like looking at the hoops bracket, to wonder too, like geographically how much that has some similarities. But, I'd say like when you see a lot of these other teams emerging, you would just love to see some new matchups. Like if Penn rematch against Maryland, hey, like it'd be interesting to see Penn against another ACC team that they haven't played. That would be the only thing from a fan perspective I would just love to see more of, especially knowing that location's the big driver right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know I went through kind of the men's schedule. The women's side, I think it's exciting. I do feel like in women's, and we've seen this all year, it's like there are those top 3 teams and they really have separated themselves. UNC has separated themselves at the top, right? They beat BC twice. They beat Northwestern once. BC is that 2 seed, Northwestern's that 3 seed. It feels like, and this is no shade at any other program, it feels like those 3 teams are going to be at Final Four weekend. And, that's kind of how the women's game has gone. I would love, obviously, to see any sort of upset, any sort of parity in this tournament. Maybe if there are certain rematches, there's a better chance of that. I'm not sure. I guess it'll kind of be a wait and see. I do feel like, especially that UNC roster, that BC roster, just loaded with talent top to bottom. It feels like they have the best players in the game. But, nevertheless, still excited to watch that. And, Florida sneakily, they play a little bit different of a schedule just from their conference, but, they're the 4 seed. They were in the Final Four last year. They're a team just from an athletic standpoint. They've always been up there, right, with the best of them. And that ends up mattering, obviously, a lot as you get to those later games. You get to that Final Four weekend. So they're a team, would be interested to see what kind of noise they make. I do believe they played UNC decently tight to start the year.
Yeah, I do think Florida matches up well. And then we can dig back into some of the men's games and look at a couple women's matchups. But I do think Florida, matches up well to be on a path to get to a back-to-back Final Four, with a possible, game against UVA. I think both teams would match up really well athletically. But again, whoever survives between Stanford and Denver is going to be, well suited to battle Florida. And you can't count out Mercer, who had a nice upset over Clemson that kind of surprised people earlier in the season.
And guys, I know, Steven, you kind of alluded to it, but I don't follow the women's game as closely as you guys do, and some of my friends don't. And they'll ask, and they'll be like, how good's Maryland this year? And Steven, what you just said, I think it's interesting. The women's landscape seems to be, to your point, like UNC's undefeated, BC's right there going neck to neck with them. Northwestern's kind of like right under them. And then it seems like there's a little bit of a drop off, and there's another tranche of like 4 or 5 pretty competitive teams, and then another drop off. Is that how you'd kind of like look at the landscape in the women's right now?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And, you know, just taking a look, if you look at like the Inside the Cross media poll or any of the polls, like, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 has moved a lot this year, right? There's been a lot of teams that have made their way in and out of those positions. So it's been exciting from like that front, right? Like outside of those top 3, there's been a ton of movement. There's been a lot of teams that, teams could be at 5 at one point. They could bump all the way to 15. So there's been a lot of parity elsewhere in the country. I think that's like a very good way to put it, Matt.
Guys, let's jump to Saturday's slate of men's games. We're probably not going to dig into all 4, but one that I do want to talk about is Richmond, North Carolina. North Carolina's coming off a really tough loss to Duke in the ACC semis. Richmond's hot. They're playing well. They've got 3 losses: Maryland, Cornell, Duke, 2 of those by 1 goal, and the Maryland one was early in the season. We talked about Richmond on the podcast kind of like that early mid-March, about, hey, is this going to be a year that they crack through, right? Now, if you're Richmond, if you're not getting a top 8 seed, again, no easy games. Like, what better year to do it than playing a team that they're pretty familiar with, just being, again, Virginia and North Carolina, not too far away. What are you guys' thoughts going into this game?
I think one, like, Richmond has done an incredible job. And you look at like, I have a lot of respect for like Coach Tillman, the Maryland coaching staff. Like, you just look at what Dan Chamati has done at Richmond, and Coach Richards spent there the whole time at Chamati. Like, they've done an incredible job with that program. And the fact that, Deemer, to your point, Richmond has 3 losses this year. Cornell, the number 1 team in the country, and they were up on Cornell early in that game. They lost by 1 goal. Duke by 1 goal in an overtime game, I believe. And they lost to Maryland by a few, but Richmond won the second half. They just went down. It was the first game of the season. They went down like 7-1 or something to Maryland early, and then they came back. To me, this game, like we talked about Carolina, they've been very, they probably had their most challenging game of the year against Duke this past weekend. They've been very dynamic, and a lot of that's Owen Duffy and Dom Petramala. I think in Hunter Smith, Richmond has a defender that can actually match up probably with Owen Duffy in this game and actually do a nice job. I don't know Richmond's defense well enough to know if they can cover Petramala well on the ball, but they've always been such a well-coached team. And like Coach Richards, like, they'll slide when they have to. And so they're like organized and buttoned up in that regard. And where I think they're talented enough to cover and match up well with a team like UNC, I think they're well coached enough to execute in a game like this. And it does feel a little bit unfair to say, like, is Richmond going to like break through this year because they have to beat North Carolina, who's a top team, and they've had such a great year, and like defining this season based off can they beat North Carolina in the playoffs is challenging because, I mean, they've had a great season, but I think it's a team that certainly could, and I think it's a coaching staff that, like, if any staff in the country can do it, like, that's a staff that you'd want to look out for.
Yeah, I think it's great because I think it's setting the stage for the entire tournament, right? It's the first game that we're going to get on Saturday. So really looking forward to it. I think what stands out, just even looking at Richmond's schedule, like, they don't let teams score that many goals, right? Even in the loss to Maryland, they let them score 12. A loss to Cornell, the nation's best offense, Cornell only scores 12. They lose to Duke. Duke only scores 13. So they're it's not like they're losing games, even 18-12. So that stands out just defensively. What I'm very split on how I think this game's going to go, and I'm not going to make any predictions. But say Cornell wins their first round against Albany or Siena, it's like, oh, you're the 1 seed, all right, here's, either UNC or Richmond waiting for you in the quarterfinal. UNC, a team with 2 stud attackmen, arguably the best Fogo in the country. Or here's Richmond, who you barely beat by 1 goal in the quarterfinal. So it's like, I know I'm not getting ahead of myself too much, but that quarterfinal round, is extremely excited as well. And that's just like top matchup after top matchup. So really looking forward to the Richmond UNC one. I think it's going to be a tight game regardless. So, we'll see.
I think, one thing I like to see in this game, like I saw an interview with Don Petramala, just, giving a lot of shout outs to his, D mid rope unit, and obviously a guy like, Aiden O'Neill, just from an ex attackman standpoint, has really facilitated and done a lot for the Richmond offense. But how can their supporting cast win matchups and keep getting the offense going? And then on the flip side, how does Richmond game plan for Duffy and Petramala? And then if they can effectively neutralize them and limit them from getting hot at home, how does the supporting cast for UNC step up on the offensive end? How does a guy like Brevin Wilson, who it's been really cool, we've known Brevin for a while, seeing him emerge as an initiator and a playmaker, how does he keep stepping up? How does Caden Harshberger step up? Other guys like putting the ball in the back of the net and generating offense against a really good Richmond defense. Like, I think those are going to be interesting storylines when a lot of other spots on the field, face-off goalie, are going to be pretty even.
What year is Littlejohn's a freshman, right? Lucas Littlejohn for sophomore. Richmond's pretty, like, both these teams are kind of young, right? Like UNC, we've talked about being younger this year, and not like, they just don't have a lot of like those senior guys in those like main roles, right? And Richmond's similar. Like O'Neill's young, Hunter Smith's not a senior, and then they're going to return a lot of players next year. So it's like both of these teams, it's going to be a little bit of like a maturity test, I think, for who in a playoff game can be consistent and show up. One thing, just I'm looking, guys, as you mentioned the quarterfinal round. And so, like, yeah, Cornell has to play the winner of Richmond, North Carolina challenge game. But you just like look at the whole quarterfinal slate most likely, right? So the Ohio State Notre Dame plays the winner of Colgate Penn State. If you assume that's going to be Penn State, which is Colgate could win, by the way. But like then you got Ohio State or Notre Dame versus Penn State. Potentially Syracuse and Harvard versus Princeton, Towson. So like you're looking likely Princeton and a Cuse or Harvard there. Then you get down to Georgetown, Duke, and Maryland hopefully wins against a Robert Morris or Air Force. And so you're looking at this next round, and like those 8 teams are like, that's like the legit slate of men's teams that really any of them could beat each other. And, like Penn State has beat Cornell. Like Richmond did take Cornell down to the wire. UNC is very capable. Ohio State or Notre Dame could be the best team in the country on any given day. Princeton Cuse. Nobody wants to run into Princeton Cuse or even Harvard down the stretch.
Deemer, one question for you, just, taking a look, if we just switch to one other game that is definitely catching my attention, just Georgetown at Duke. Duke, they did not walk away with a championship on Sunday against Syracuse in the ACC final. But, that was a 9-8 game. And, okay, teams are on 2 days rest. Maybe people are like tired, but I have to say, with watching like the amount of possessions and, just from like face-off play to literal just time of possession, and I guess Syracuse's offense, like Duke's defense really does impress me so much. And the fact that they kept this game to a 9-8 game and Duke had a chance and a legitimate shot on the crease to tie it at the end. Duke, I do have a lot of respect for this season in the progress that they've made. Like they've had some bad loss. You could say their Denver loss was like their bad loss, but they've continued to improve. And I do think that this defense is leading them into May, in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, which is, not usually the case when it comes to like a Duke team down the season. Usually it's, a firepower coming together, a lot of other, good pieces, but even like I feel like, back to our couple championships, like, our goalies were around 50% or below, so it was always still driven offensively. Whereas as opposed to, I think Jameson's really grown in the cage. Like he's made some really fantastic saves, these last couple weeks where he's really been tested, by a lot of good guys. I think again, like just the thing that's going to stand out to me is like, how efficiently can they clear the ball and get their defense off the field? Because, for how hard a guy like Aiden McGuire plays, like when he gets tired, and they're playing 2 or 3 possessions in a row, like that's just where like breakdowns happen. But like when they're fresh and they're playing early in a possession, like Charlie Johnson has really emerged as one of the top cover guys in the country. They have, again, a pretty deep, consistent rope unit. And again, like 2 LSNs and other poles that I think can really, really be effective in a face-off crew that, again, all those guys, but even Engelke's started to emerge. They've definitely been, powering the team. And so I just think offensively, if they can take good shots, get high percentage opportunities, they're going to be in a good spot. And again, Georgetown's going to be a battle. They're going to be, great defensively, especially led by Ty Banks.
Yeah, in Georgetown, it's a team that also the past 2 seasons, they've won that first round game. 2023, they beat Yale. 2024, they beat Penn State. So it's a team that, it's important having experience going into the tournament. Guys that have won that first round game, they've come up short in the quarterfinals both years. Georgetown, don't feel like I've gotten a great read on them. They don't necessarily have like bad losses. They just don't have a ton of wins that really stand out, which is why they had to win that Big East tournament to get in. But they definitely have their share of firepower, and I believe Aiden Carroll, he was 8 goals, 2 assists in the Big East championship, right? Like 10 points in any game is legit, but in the Big East championship, that's a lot. So looking forward to that game. I think that'll be a lot of fun to watch for that Saturday nightcap.
Guys, let's switch gears here to Sunday. Again, I think there's a couple directions that we could go with this, but we had Pat Cav on the show. Why don't we get right into Notre Dame at Ohio State? Ohio State beat Notre Dame 10-9, March 8th, earlier in the season. Like you mentioned, Steven, Ohio State, Big Ten champs, wins over Notre Dame, Penn State, and Maryland. Maryland was one of their bigger losses during the season. And again, a lot of transfers on offense that have come together to, formulate like a good balanced unit, with Marinier being a big time shooter and scorer. But the defense and Fayok have been really stout all season. What do you guys think going into this one?
Well, I remember Ohio State beating Notre Dame, and it was like a huge upset, right? Like I was like, what? And now you're looking at this game, and Ohio State's obviously the 4 seed. Notre Dame's unranked. Ohio State is like, I mean, they're just tough to play against, and a big part of that is Caleb Fayok in the goal. Like, he's seeing the ball really well. He's a big body, takes up a lot of space, but his great hands and can catch the ball too. And so I do think I think he can get in shooters' heads pretty easily. And also, Ohio State's been playing really solid lacrosse all the way around, where I think they'll match up pretty well with Notre Dame on the ball. And as we talked about with Pat Cav earlier, they're just solid on offense. They have some, like Garrett Haas, I think, is a guy that's really impressed me this year for Ohio State, just dodging from X, how capable he is. I wonder if he'll get the Sean Light matchup with Notre Dame. And obviously Sean Light's one of, if not the best defender in college lacrosse. But like then Ohio State attacks through the midfield. They have these big middies, and they know how to find Marinier off the ball. And I just think Ohio State is a really tough team to play, because I think, as we know, like when you're playing good defense, you have a great goalie and an offense that can consistently generate quality shots. Like that's a tournament team. That being said, I think Notre Dame has been a little bit up and down this year, but their potential is through the roof, and they can beat anybody. And I'm not going to pick a team here because I have no idea. But that's my take on the last half of the season of, like, you see Notre Dame at 8-4. Like, we all thought Notre Dame was going to be like the number 1 team in the country this year, and they're still capable of being that. They just kind of had a little bit of a rocky road to get here.
Kind of like how Notre Dame's, how they get to go on the road. Deemer, you alluded a little bit to it in our conversation with Pat Cap, but it's like they don't have all this pressure, right? They're going on the road. They're playing Ohio State. Ohio State just came off this big win. Ohio State beat them earlier in the year. I think they're in a good spot. I think just from watching them this year, I do think they definitely look different from the past 2 years, and that's totally fine, right? It's almost impossible to keep that level of play up. But I think just from like a personnel standpoint, they look like they're playing a little heavy. Like, they're thinking a little bit too much, gripping the sticks a little tight. I think it could loosen them up a little bit. And they definitely still have the talent there to make an impact. So that's going to be, a super high level game. And, also can't count out like Chris Kavanagh. He's just been phenomenal in the tournament, his entire career there. So, excited to watch him play on Sunday.
Yeah, I think the thing that, when I go into this matchup, watching it, that if I'm an Ohio State fan, I have a little more confidence as opposed to like Notre Dame teams in the past, is that I think their rope unit looks a little more susceptible, to getting beat. I don't think this has been Ramsey's best season, as a short stick, for a really highly touted guy. And then I think, you know, going off of that, Richard Ellie is still playing well at 56%, but he's not Entenmann, so that's just probably a goal or a goal and a half a game that, they're giving up that they maybe weren't giving up last year, and so I just think like, with some of that, it just creates, more opportunities for the other team's offense and just puts even more pressure on an offense that lost some pieces. I don't know if Jeffrey's going to be back for the tournament, who was someone was really coming on strong, for Notre Dame from a dodging perspective. And so, it'll be interesting to see what other guys can step up and produce when you've got Van Buren that's going to be in a huge battle with Kavanagh all day.
I think if Notre Dame's going to win this game, they're going to have to generate. They're going to have to initiate offense to the midfield and generate advantages there. I don't think they're going to have a great, and I could be totally wrong, a great advantage dodging Ohio State's close defense consistently. And I think they're going to need to score a lot of goals in the gray. So like a lot of like that ride back mentality, loose balls around the heart of the defense, and which is kind of Notre Dame's MO. And to your point of them going on the road, I bet their messaging this weekend is just like kind of like F everyone else. Like we're like going after this with everything we got. So I would expect to see that type of play, but I don't think it's going to be this like pretty 6-on-6 offense, back and forth. It's going to be like a messy ride, score some crazy fun to watch goals type of deal. If they are going to be able to get to double digits offensively and win the game.
Guys, let's pivot to our last men's game that we'll talk about. I think I saw a stat, maybe it was from 1918, was the last time that someone beat Syracuse 2 times in the Dome during the season. And I think that was that Onondaga Community College, possibly. I don't know where I got it from. I obviously should have bookmarked it, but it was something like ridiculous in terms of the last time Syracuse has lost 2 games to the same team at home in a season. So I think the home field advantage, plays back into Cuse's favor. However, it's going to be an awesome game. This was an awesome one last time around. McCool has completely turned around his season based on that performance, finishing as ACC goaltender of the year. But he was pulled in that game. Graham Stevens was just under 50% for Harvard and made a name for himself. And Johnny Mullen was 90% at the faceoff X in the first game. And, again, Syracuse still lost 14-15. Steve, as an alum, how are you feeling coming into this one?
I think if the stats are the same, I don't see, and I don't know if the stats will be the same, but if the stats are the same, I don't think that you can replicate that result, twice. Being at that game, I was in the booth for that game. That was one of the crazier lacrosse games I've seen, just from a possession battle. Like Johnny Mullen was literally automatic. He was, obviously 90%, but 28 for 31. Like Harvard was throwing all these different guys at him. So Syracuse had the ball a ton. Credit to Harvard's defensive game plan. They ended up stifling Syracuse after I think Syracuse went up like 5-0 before, Sam Kane and the Harvard offense even touched the ball. At the same time, I think they're both different teams. I think Harvard's really talented, and I think Harvard's going to be going into this game also with that level of confidence of like, hey, we won 3 faceoffs. Our goalie, while Graham Stevens, he played really well. He's still below 50%, right? I think he's a great goalie, but and we're still able to win that game. Like we can kind of do anything, right? They're on the road. Syracuse coming off the ACC tournament, like Harvard has nothing to lose. I thought Syracuse, their backs were against the wall headed into that ACC tournament. I thought if they lost to Notre Dame in that first round game on Friday, I thought there was a really solid chance that they weren't going to be making the NCAA tournament. And then they beat Notre Dame, and then they followed up with a 9-8 win over Duke, winning their first ACC championship since 2016. So they've really, corrected their season, and I think they're going into this game on the right foot. But one guy that you did point out, Jimmy McCool, he's coming off of, an ACC championship MVP, Whereas last time he played Harvard, he got pulled in the third quarter, and maybe he was questioning if he was ever going to get on the field again. So just also speaks to like the tide of the season and how things can change from a personnel perspective, but also from a team perspective. But I think both teams will be ready to go. I think Jerry Burns like masterful, and I got the chance to talk with him before and after the game, and just hearing him say like he's not like worried about the faceoff. He wasn't worried about it before. He's like, you can win games without winning the faceoff, and it's like, well, that never came truer than that day. So you don't know. Syracuse is off of their usual. They usually, if they host a game, they're always that 7:30 game on Sunday. That goes to Cornell. So Syracuse will be the 5 p.m. slot. Really looking forward to this one. Two great teams, and I do expect it to be a close one.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to. I mean, Steven, you know this game better than anybody. You called the last one. I just think Harvard's kind of that team that got in that maybe wasn't sure, right? I think they're extremely great. Like, Syracuse is grateful to be in the tournament. Harvard's, I think, very grateful to be playing another weekend. Harvard's losses, Colgate, who's in the tournament and a great team, Princeton twice, and Cornell. We had Sam King on the podcast, earlier in the season. Sam King, one of the best players in the country, a great just like leader, captain of that team. And so, the face-off thing is, I'm with you, Steven. It's hard. Like, it's going to be hard to reproduce that, but I mean, they did it last time. And I think a lot of it comes down to if Syracuse is playing the way they've been playing recently, they're a tough team to beat. They just really are, especially if they're able to win faceoffs like that. But if Harvard's able to, if Cuse isn't saving the ball well and Harvard's able to get stops, obviously it can be a competitive game.
Yeah. One thing I would say, and I'm just looking it up right now just to check, but in that game that they won, Sam King was 2-1 on 7 shots. I think he's going to need to have a big, like all Ivy, top attackman in the country type of performance to lift Harvard up, and not to put any like extra pressure on him. But like when I'm thinking about the teams that win these first round games and then make a run, their top attackman comes up in the big moments. We saw that at a Kirst, even against Princeton in the Ivy Championship. And, again, like that pressure always is put on someone like a Spolina, when it comes to, being the guy. I think for Harvard to replicate on the road, I think they have a really balanced offense, and Jack Spidell has really emerged to give Sam more flexibility. But I think Sam having a big shooting day is going to be important in really getting things going for the Harvard offense.
Figueres did a great job on him in that first game. They've got like similar body types. I think it's a good matchup for Figueres from that perspective. But I do agree. And I think Kane wasn't getting his points, but I will say in that game, like he was playing like your prototypical, like very fundamental attackman, like drawing the slide, dragging it out, moving it. Like he was still operating. But I agree, when that ball is in his stick, like that Harvard offense is at its best. And Spidell, that kid is legit. He can finish just about anything. And I also think Malone had a big game. I think he had like 6 points against Syracuse the last time. He, I think, was getting the third defender in Grace, and like he's also a really talented player.
Guys, to wrap up here, one women's game I just wanted to touch on. We touched on a few in some of the matchups earlier, but I am really excited for Clemson versus Navy. That's at 5 p.m. on Friday. The winner gets UNC. So, certainly a daunting one after that, but big shout out to Clemson on their first NCAA tournament appearance. They made the ACC semifinals as well. Navy Patriot League champs after 2 big wins against Army and Loyola. And freshman Alyssa Chung has made a massive impact, arguably the best freshman in the country. And obviously, if you throw in, redshirt freshmen, you have Franny Hahn and Chloe Humphrey in that same discussion amongst probably a couple others, but AC's made a massive impact. Clemson runs a backer zone D, high pressure. They're going to be without one of their star scorers, Kayla McLeod, who went down with an injury a couple weeks ago. But midfielder Natalie Shirtliff was definitely in the running for ACC Midi of the Year. So her and some of her other classmates and some of the transfer that they have are going to be gearing up for a great one against Navy that I'm excited to watch.
Yeah, that should be a great game. And, I think everyone kind of always pencils in Loyola to win that Patriot League tournament on the women's side. They've just been so dominant in that league since they switched over from the Big East. But, huge credit there to Navy and what they were able to do. Is it tough draw? You win that game Friday. You got UNC waiting for you on Sunday. But hey, it's tournament time. It's May. Anything can happen.
Guys, awesome show today. For anyone that tuned in, we appreciate the support. Hopefully you came away with a few takeaways from the Pat Cav interview. We appreciate you sharing around our podcast with other players, coaches, and parents that might enjoy. We're looking forward to the weekend. Hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll be back next week to break it down and preview the quarterfinals after that.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. See you.
See you guys.